when my kids were in elementary, middle school, high school, it wasn't that distinctly different from when I was in school back in the late 60s and 70s. When I talk about kind of the materials they covered and all that, now granted that the level of activities were significantly higher, but the peer pressure is not really no different, just the context may have been slightly different. You fast forward to now, with the influence of social media, I see that in my grandchildren, what social media is doing and some of the pressures are doing. One of the things that, and it's getting influence from all angles. Even the schools are looking at ways to address some of these peer pressure, but it just seems like it's much more intense on the youth, creating the tension between parents and the kids. I will say that in my experience, that regardless of the challenges the kids have, they're incredibly resilient, and most of them will figure it out on their own. But sometimes you have to go through some rather tough times. And I could tell you from my perspective, there were times that my son did what I would call some of the most stupid things, and I had to reflect back on a prior time when Bill Cosby was a kind of an influence for fathers before his fall. A lot of the experience he related on just his own comedy albums I experienced as a father myself, and so there was it when you realize that you're not the only one experiencing it, you may be looking at it from your perspective. It makes it easier to make decisions that maybe you're not making the wrong decisions. Kids are going to be kids. I would say my daughter and myself have a much different relationship than my son and I did during his youth. Now that they're adults, they're doing everything on their own. Obviously now we still have to kind of support them financially because of just the expense, the cost of everything else. But they're doing things on their own. They're self-motivated. They're raising great kids, and they're doing a great job. And that gives me kind of a measure of feeling success. Is that I didn't raise kids that were set up to fail. And if I had one advice to fathers out there, is that whatever you do when you have your children doing things, keep in mind is that what you want to do is make sure you're not setting up for them to fail, but let them do it. Do what they need to do, and always be there if they fall. Be there to pick them up, but let them try, let them adventure. They're not going to succeed if they don't get some experiences. Your life experiences are really with what you learn from failure. You got to let them try, and if they fail, help them out, but don't set them up to fail. I guess that's my biggest philosophy I have. And I take that into my business career when I'm training people, when I got people who work for me, who I expect them to do business with them. I treat them similarly, that you give them enough, in a business context, we say give them enough rope to hang themselves on, but don't let them actually accomplish that. And I believe that as a result of that, I've been able to breed some successful leaders. And I will say that some of my experience was also came up through training I was a scoutmaster for a Boy Scout troop of 65 boys. And you have every single personality. So that, I hate to say it, but after you deal with 65 different personalities, you realize maybe your kid's not so bad after all.
It's interesting when, you were raising your kiddos, you said they're 37 and
Yeah, 38. Yeah.
37, 38. So it was a little bit different, obviously, back then. It's a challenge these days because, I want to let my 9-year-old boy go ride his bike around the neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm worried that people are going to say, gosh, what are you letting this little child out of your sight for? And, that dichotomy has changed so significantly. And it just goes back to your point, Paul, in particular, you got to let them do their things. You got to let them cross the street and fall on their bike and be there to help them out. But don't coddle them because that's just causing
Yeah.
more and more challenges.
And when you've got for lack of a better phrase, people who have more time on their hands than they should, worrying about what your kids are doing, as long as you explain to your kids that you trust them, and they reward you with that trust coming back. And you know, most kids don't. You know, they have some decent judgment. They learn judgment and they learn from trust and everything else. They need confidence, and you get confidence not by telling them what direction to go and restricting them from doing things because you're worried about what the neighbors might say. It's building that trust with your kids to make sure that they, when they're riding around in the neighborhood, don't do anything, for lack of a better phrase, stupid. Remember, you don't trespass on people's lawns, and don't, be respectful of other people, and that goes a long way. And that's what I've done with my kids. I mean, honestly, if I watched everything my kids did when they were young, I would be a nervous wreck all the time. And I learned to let them. They have the capability of being responsible young people, and if you don't let them show that, then they'll never develop that social skill.
You've had a very illustrious career. Moving up, obviously the so-called corporate ladder, you've managed some very significant operations. When I reflect on my budding professional career, especially in a W-2 Fortune 500 environment, I kind of look back and I think, gosh, I kicked myself, right? There were times when I look back even 5 to 7 years ago and I say, had I just advocated for myself a little bit more, had I just done this and this, my trajectory could have completely changed and I would have been able to do this and that. So I'm curious, Paul, from your experience, business wise, what are some times when you were at your lowest low in your career? And what did you do, sir, to kind of dig yourself out of that and position yourself to continue to move?
Yeah, there's been a couple of occasions like that, and not to get bogged down in details, but there are times when I wondered if I made the right decision for whatever reason, and the odds were against me. And you know, uh, I if it looked like it was going to be something that was going to be very difficult, I would obviously bring my wife was always aware of it, but I would look to faith, and I would remember that my mother gave me something way back when my grandfather died, who I was very close to when I was in my early 20s. No, yeah, I was early 20s, and it was that poem someone wrote about, the footprints in the sand. I'm sure you're familiar with that. There's, and I remember those times. I remember reflect on that when times get tough. No, it doesn't solve all the problems, but it reminds you that there's someone else watching out for you. And and so typically, what as a result of that, it gave me a little bit more confidence to be able to kind of buckle up, and buck up and do the job, and listen to if sometimes you're getting a warning message as a result of those dark times, that you need to change something in your approach. I've taken it as a tool to better myself. When I was in the beginning of my career, I'd there was a time when I felt like I was failing. What I did was I went and talked to my boss, and then I did some things to change up. I went back to night school and worked on my graduate degree, something that would be a kind of create a change in the way I was doing things. Another time, it was I was putting in a tremendous amount of hours, and when I got the warning message, I sat back and reflected, and I reflected on the fact that, well, maybe I was leaving something else behind when I was getting those dark points, and that was my family. And so I basically looked for another career. I resigned from my job, found another job, but that job allowed me to spend more time with my family. And yeah, it could have been, I could have been on a different career track and everything else, but those are decisions I made because I realized that I was losing something else in my life, and I recentered it. And and there's always been times when things happen that you don't expect, but in general, I've just been, I look at things I'm doing that I need to change, because it's if you get mired in the negative, you just never get out of it. and I just, I found it just by looking at kind of doing a little soul searching of what I need to do differently. That's really helped me tremendously. And uh, do I always get it right? No, not always. But in the end run, I'm always coming out better as a whole than I am financially sometimes.